A new study by researchers at the University of Johannesburg has found that coloured, Indian and white South Africans have a tendency to inflate their social positions beyond what is objectively true. This is while black people tend to underestimate their position. To speak to us more about how the legacy of apartheid still dominates discussions about class and status, we're joined by Frederich Kirsten, an economist at the University of Johannesburg. Frederich, a pleasure to have you on the program this evening. Well, coloured Indian and white South Africans, as we've heard, have a tendency to inflate their social positions beyond what is objectively true, as opposed to black people who tend to really underestimate their position. Why is that?
Yes, so thank you very much for having me on the show. So this study actually looked at the status perceptions and looked at why do certain population groups inflate and deflate. Now, the reasoning behind it is still a little bit unknown, but there are some theories to discuss regarding why black people might deflate their social position, and that is also due to the fact that there's still a lingering legacy of apartheid in the status and class determination, where people don't maybe want to place themselves in the predominantly white middle class that was historically in the apartheid area. And that can be one of the reasons why black people might deflate their social position. But then the study also shows that there's even a strong tendency to even inflate their social position. So what we find in this study is that the increase in intra-race inequality within group inequality has also made it more difficult for people to position themselves in society and who they compare themselves to when they make these social determinants or social position choices.
Why is this data academically important for one's subjective self, especially in an unequal system like what we have?
Yes, so these subjective perceptions have actually been shown to influence a lot of political behavior, like your voting behavior. A lot of US-based studies have found that your status perception and also your bias perception of misplacing yourself in society actually influence your voting behavior, your demand for redistribution, and also your action towards class conflict. A lot of studies have shown it's not always the objective inequality, but how we perceive inequality that normally leads us to action. And that's where this study is relevant, because we look at South Africa, the current climate in South Africa, and we look at what has happened in the past few years, and we want to say, okay, but what drives people at the moment maybe to take action based on the high and record levels of inequality in the country?
Let's speak about how this study was conducted and how big was the pool?
Yes, so it's around 3,000 individuals for each wave. 2009, 2019, so it's around 6,000 individual studies or individuals that were captured in the study. So the sample is quite small, but it does still capture enough variance in terms of the population groups, gender, to actually give some meaningful results and insight into status perception, something that has not really been done in South Africa in detail.
Let's speak about how rigid are these class boundaries and what exactly constitutes someone as being in a certain class?
Yeah, so class definition is actually a very difficult concept because there's so many definitions for what constitutes the middle class in South Africa. Middle class lifestyle is the actual middle class determined by some income level. But for my study, what I did is I used the Ericsson Goldfro, a very popular measure based on employment. And whether you have certain employment levels and whether you supervise people in your job, so maybe meaning you own a business or you have people working for you, that then defines your class position. It's a very popular technique, but again, there's a lot of debate about the different objective measures for all of class. And then the subjective measure is the control ladder question, where you ask the individual to place themselves on a ladder if they themselves view the richest and poorest person they know. And then they place themselves on this 10-step ladder.
As we wrap up, tell us why all this information is so important. You raised interesting points around how this data may be used to assess how voting behavior is even conducted at times.
Yes. So voting behavior, how it works is if I have an inflated position in society, so I see myself higher up than my actual position, then what can happen is I would look at certain tax incentives and policies, and I would say I don't want more tax because I'm scared I'm going to be influenced by it, where in truth I'm actually going to benefit from it. So if I have a biased perception, then I might see myself differently, and therefore I will have different views about redistribution, about inequality, and about tax incentives. And that is where the important literature comes in.
That was Frederich Kirsten, an economist at the University of Johannesburg, of course, taking us through that study, also showing the legacy of apartheid still dominating discussions about class status, so says the University of Johannesburg.